Good morning, viewers, and welcome to the conversation with me, Denise Shorai, a platform where we deliberate on topical issues affecting the nation of Zimbabwe. And today, I'm joined by the director of Zimbabwe Crisis Coalition, Mr. Blessing Vava. In deliberating on the topic, is dialogue the panacea to Zimbabwe's crisis? Good morning, Mr. Vava, and welcome to the conversation.
Good morning, Dennis, and thank you guys for providing us this platform.
Mr. Vava, we have seen Zimbabweans being on social media with the hashtag Zimbabwean Lives Matter, and it triggered assumptions or allegations that Zimbabwe is in crisis. And we have the government on record saying that Zimbabwe is not having a crisis. So the question is Zimbabwe in a crisis?
I think, firstly, we must be able to appreciate that the Zimbabwe had a military coup that happened in November 2017. And from that military coup, that's when the legitimacy crisis, I think, started, because it was an unconstitutional change of government. We saw the military tanks being rolled in the streets and the subsequent resignation of President Robert Mugabe. But that is it may. After the 30th July elections of 2018, we saw also the role of the military and in the actions that were infractions on human freedoms and security, coupled with an escalation crisis in the socio-economic sectors that have cast a bleak future for the country. As I'm speaking to you now, we have dozens of political activists that are in prison. The country itself is in a lockdown that we have realized that it was not just to deal with COVID-19, but a lockdown that was also meant to curtail fundamental freedoms as enshrined in the Constitution. We're also facing a crisis in the sense that there are attempts by the government of Zimbabwe to amend, the Constitution that was promulgated in March of 2013 when Zimbabweans, adopted that Constitution through a referendum. So it's a cocktail of issues. I can go on and on. The human rights abuses, the decay of the economy. The economy is almost near collapse. So I can go on and on in terms of trying to highlight the issues that are bedeviling in this country.
So you are agreeing that Zimbabwe is in a crisis?
It's only a mad person who would think that you are operating normally. A country that is operating normally is a country that will not see the military in the streets. The military must go to the barracks. Right now, I can't talk of the economy. I think I've tried to highlight a cocktail of issues that are, affecting our country. And right now, the younger population, their goal is to get a passport, either to get a passport or to get to the nearest border, either skipping to Zambia, skipping to South Africa, skipping to Botswana. Even in these lockdown restrictions, when borders are closed, we still have a majority of our people leaving the country, because of the economic and the political challenges. And also, we can look at, the employment sector and civil servants, the health professionals. They've been on strike and they are surviving on meager allowances that are way, way, way below the poverty line. So in a nutshell, we can not deny, it's now undeniable that Zimbabwe needs dialogue. Zimbabweans need to come together. Zimbabwe needs to return to full norm compliance in modern statecraft by implementing comprehensive electoral, social, economic, and political reforms.
Thank you so much, Mr. Baba. The President Emerson Mnangagwa, in his UN speech, he highlighted that the country is facing humanitarian challenges in which, in the case of Zimbabwe, have been worsened by the illegally imposed sanctions, the negative impact of climate change, and the COVID-19. What's your comment on that?
I think that the issue of sanctions, it is now a tired record. You should be aware of a meeting that Mnangagwa addressed in February of 2018. I think it came headline in the weekly state-owned Sunday Mail, when he said that we must stop mourning about sanctions. I think the sanctions mantra is just an excuse for the failure to deliver. The government of Mnangagwa, they promised a lot. They promised a new dispensation. They promised Zimbabwe open for business. They promised, to undertake, certain reforms, political reforms, economic reforms. But we have not seen the appetite for reform. And for us to hover around the sanctions, I think we are just doing a disservice. We know what needs to be done. The government of President Mnangagwa knows what has to be done. But the killing of people has nothing to do with sanctions. The people that were shot on August 1 of 2018, and also the shootings that also happened in January of 2019, and the abuses that have been going on, the neoliberal economic policies that have reduced our citizens into beggars, that has nothing to do with sanctions. It's some things that we can control. Why don't we do the correct things so that we solve the issues that are bedeviling our country?
Yeah, you highlighted a number of issues to deal with the humanitarian abuses, human rights abuses. And the Ministry of State Security, they released a press statement by Honorable Nube. He said that the country's security and stability is currently under a surge from a number of threats being fomented by internal and external actors funded by Western allies, discrediting all the human rights abuses, saying that these are fake adoptions and people are spreading lies of human rights abuses. What's your comment? What's your take in such a session?
I think that the comments by the Minister of State, they're quite unfortunate, and it's just a blame game, and they are trying to use that as a cover, to thwart, any critical voices that are opposed to their misrule. There is nothing, there's no. If anything, I think ZANU-PF is a danger to itself. This is a government that came out from a military coup. That was not a legitimate process of November 2017. That was an illegal, change of government. There was no election. There was no democratic processes that happened. So we need to address the ghost of November 2017. And how do you address that? We address the ghost of November 2017 by curing the coup. And curing of the coup means that Zimbabwe has to go for reform. Zimbabwe needs, to have a process where all Zimbabweans are brought together so that we chart a way forward. To blame civil society and to blame the opposition, I think it's just disingenuous, because we know who specializes in guns. We have a clear example of what they did on November 2017.
You share the same sentiments with the MDC Alliance President Nelson Chamisa. He said that on the day they were commemorating and celebrating their anniversary, he said that the real crisis in Zimbabwe is of stolen elections, the legitimacy crisis. Is this a genuine concern by the opposition party, given that President Mnangagwa is recognized by regional and international borders?
Well, I wouldn't want to go there, but what I would say is that what our country needs at the moment, and what the government of Zimbabwe needs to do, firstly, they have to end, they have to put an end, a stop to torture, to abductions, enforced disappearances, murder, the rapings, the maimings of civilians by the military and state security agents and vigilante groups. We saw what happened to this NASU president, Comrade Takudzwa Ngadzor, in broad daylight when vigilante groups disrupted the press conference, brutalized him in broad daylight, and unfortunately was arrested after that incident. And secondly, I think we need to decriminalize the work of the civic society, an end to the continued persecution, the arbitrary arrest of civil society leaders, trade unions, and political activists. And thirdly, I think we need to ensure that there's peace and human security prevailing in our country, so that every citizen, is allowed to express, their views in the processes of trying to find solutions to the country. And fourthly, I think that there's a need for the government of Emmerson Mnangagwa to stop weakening the constitution through the amendments that are meant to entrench a one-party state, amendments that are meant to entrench a dictatorship, amendments that are meant to derail, the democratic gains that the country, has scored so far. So I think that there's a lot that needs to be done. The blame game, it's now the time for the blame game to stop. And what is that process that will make sure that, Zimbabwe goes back to full norm compliance? Us, as the Crisis Zimbabwe Coalition, we've set out, minimum standards and minimum demands that we think that they will, bring everyone on board, a broad-based approach that will lead to, full norm compliance, that will lead to a democratic state. I think, firstly, that we need a national dialogue process. That national dialogue process must involve all stakeholders. It must not leave out anyone. It should have, because the risk of us relegating that dialogue to political parties, we saw what happened during the GNU, that the end result was an elite pact, that was in total dissonance with the citizens' interests, and the politicians ended up, having a give and take in terms of what eventually came out, especially also the global political agreement. So that dialogue process, and it must also have a national, visioning process that will include, amongst others, the civil society, the government, political parties, business, religious groups, the students, the labor unions, the churches. And that dialogue process should produce, a clearly timed, roadmap, to the demilitarization of civilian political processes and the restoration of normalcy by focusing on key political reforms. I've mentioned the reforms earlier, political reforms, economic reforms, social reforms.
You are saying that the roadmap to ending Zimbabwe's crisis is inclusive dialogue with everyone participating in it.
Sorry, I didn't get your question.
I'm confirming what you're saying, that the end to Zimbabwe's crisis is an inclusive dialogue with everyone participating in it.
I think that what we think as the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition, we have a feeling that we must not relegate the future of this country to political parties. We must not, leave it to the MDC. We must not leave it to ZANU-PF. But this is a process that must involve everyone. Zimbabweans must have ownership of the processes, that governs them. Zimbabweans need to be involved, and their involvement, it will be seen by our approach in terms of how we are going to go for, the national dialogue process. But as the civil society, we have a process that we are doing is the Crisis Zimbabwe Coalition of a broader alliance, where we are going on a consultative process nationally, asking the citizens, asking the farmers, asking the churches. And that process, it will lead into a people's convention. And that people's convention would lead into a broader alliance. That broader alliance that will set out, clear timeframes in terms of, the pressure that we're also going to exert for Zimbabwe to return to full normalcy, or pressure to force the government of Zimbabwe to adhere to democratic rule, to adhere to good governance, to adhere to the principles of respecting, human rights, to respecting, the media freedoms, and respecting, divergence of views.
The Zimbabwe's political and economical crisis dates back to early 2000. There are calls for dialogue between ZANU-PF and MDC. Could this be the remedy to the current crisis?
You are breaking, can you come again?
Could this be the remedy to the current crisis?
In terms of the economy, your first part, you're talking about the economic meltdown, is it? That it is a...
It dates back to the early 2000s.
Yes, I think it's not just from 2000. We must understand that Zimbabwe has had many wrong turns. The ESAP, the Economic Structural Adjustment Program, which were prescriptions of the World Bank and the IMF, and it resulted in the retrenchment of of a majority of the working class people, and it then inculcated neoliberal policies. And what we need now is a Zimbabwe that has a clear economic reform roadmap that will see the implementation of pro-poor and inclusive economic policies. We need economic transformation, stabilization, and growth that is also aimed at achieving inclusive, sustainable economic growth and development. And we feel that firstly, we also need to have an adoption of the extractive industries, transparency initiatives. You know what's happening in the extractive industries, where the Chinese are coming, the shared deals that are happening, and, exploiting our resources. We also need to broaden, the social dialogue under the tripartite negotiating forum. That should also, we feel that it should also include civil society and the informal, economic players. Right now, Zimbabwe's economy is now informalized. So we have the vendors, informal traders on one hand that are contributing a lot in economic development, and they're contributing a lot to our fiscus. And also, we need reforms and the strengthening of economic institutions that will support growth of the economy by the government. We would need, the ratification of the ILO, that is the International Labour Organization Recommendation 204 on transition from informal to formal economy. We also need the strengthening of, the tax regime and punitive measures for economic saboteurs. We have heard the list of, economic saboteurs when Mnangagwa came, but nothing has happened to that. It's a catch and release. They publish the names, but there hasn't been any serious conviction to talk about. We also need, stimulation of the economy through the reduction of taxes. I think Zimbabwe is one of the most taxed countries in this world. You wouldn't understand where even the money that was taxed is going. So I think in a nutshell, that's what we think it should be done in terms of the growth of the economy and resuscitating the Zimbabwean economy.
Yeah, but the government is now saying that in order to resuscitate the economy, they're now adopting the land compensation reform in order to try to restructure and reorganize its relationships with the Western allies. What's your comment on that?
I think that move is insincere. We saw what happened to that farmer in Maronde. This is just the talk about the compensation. It's meant to address, to dupe, the international community. But I would not go there. What is so disheartening is that there is a clear clear strategy, or should I say, neglect of the black, working class population that were a majority, in those farming communities, and no one is even talking about, compensation of that. I had felt, and we had felt, that the rights of the citizens also that were threatened, during the land reform program should also be respected, and those black farmers should also be compensated because they lost their livelihoods, they lost, they lost shelter, and a majority of them either died, either they left the country, or they're still living in abject poverty. So, in terms of addressing that, the government of Zimbabwe must also be sincere and must also, in their planning, think about the plight of those black working class people in the farms.
Thank you so much. Do we need an external mediator in the process of the dialogue?
I think that what is supposed to happen first is a dialogue amongst the Zimbabweans, and the political elites must swallow their pride and be able to have conversations amongst themselves and be able to have conversations with the citizens. But that as it may, we also feel that the Southern African Development Community, to be specific, the Pan-African Parliament, the African Union, must call for and support an inclusive dialogue on Zimbabwe's future. We are not saying they must come and dictate, but they must encourage President Mnangagwa to be able to initiate an inclusive process of dialogue. If SADC can come and mediate in that dialogue, fair enough. But we have a framework that we think that we need a neutral player. The political environment is so polarized amongst the political parties. The political parties themselves are polarized in their different formations. So there's a role to play, in particular by SADC, the African Union, the Pan-African Parliament, and other mechanisms that are found continentally and regionally to be able to solve and address the issues that are bedeviling our country. Because the issues that are happening in Zimbabwe, they have a bearing across the region. The humanitarian crisis already that is being felt. The statistics that were projected, by the World Food Program, that almost 8 million Zimbabweans will face starvation. And what that means is that those 8 million, or some of those people, will be leaving the country, for greener pastures, will be leaving the country in search of food. So there is a role to play, I think, for the regional players. But the action, it has to start at home. The dialogue has to start amongst ourselves. Zimbabweans, the political elites, they have to swallow their pride. If they love this country, if they are for this country, they must stop politicking with people's lives. They must stop politicking with people's stomachs.
Thank you so much. And what role can Civic society organization play also in the dialogue?
I think that civic society in its entirety, it represents a cross section, a broader section of our society. And that it presents an opportunity in terms of the different sectorial interests that should come to that dialogue. We have the political, the civil society that deals with the political issues, religious issues, business issues, and they must engage. They must continue pressurizing the government. They must continue playing their watchdog role. But more importantly, they need to press, the government of Zimbabwe. They need to press the regional, players for Zimbabwe to return to full norm compliance, for Zimbabwe to adhere to the principles of democratic governance, to the principles of the respect of the rule of law, to the principles of good governance, etc.
Thank you. And also, moving into the same question again, and what role can the church play in resolving the current standoff?
I think that it's not limited to the church, as I've indicated earlier. That the church must continue, to speak out against evil. The messages that came out, especially the Catholic Bishops' Conference, Zimbabwe Catholic Churches, the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe, and various other religious formations, which came out, in speaking out against, the ills that were happening in this country. So yes, the churches, they represent a far bigger constituency, and in their respective areas, they must amplify that voice. They must continue. Those who pray, they must continue also praying, for better things for our country. They must also pray for wisdom, to be inculcated, or for our leaders to have wisdom, to govern the country with wisdom, and not to govern the country with evil minds.
Thank you. Moving on, the ruling party and the opposition have conditions for dialogue to take place, and that has led to a deadlock. I'm speaking in terms of the Pollard. Are these conditions justified from both parties?
Well, as I have indicated earlier, that the polarization has really affected our country, the political polarization, and the big brother mentality, the winner takes all mentality, to say, I won the elections, so I'm going to govern alone. And the talk to say we are the police, we are the army, I think that those are statements from irresponsible leadership. What we need now, I will still emphasize that what we need is for Zimbabweans to think about Zimbabwe, to think about the country, to think about the future of this country, not to think about business deals, to think about an opportunity to be in government so that you become corrupt. What we're seeing also in local government is quite regrettable, that people are becoming councillors so that they parcel out stands. The political badge is now a badge for stealing, and that's not the kind of Zimbabwe that we want. So, Pollard, yes, it's in the way that it was formed. I think it was insincere, in that already the rules were set. I think that it's very problematic when you say you have to accept that I won the election, and this other one also say you have to accept that I won. What we need here is not who won or who lost. What we need is for Zimbabweans to admit, to say, are there problems in our country? Yes, the problems are there. Are people not hungry? Yes, people are hungry. Are nurses going to work? No, they are not going to work. Are teachers adequately paid? No, they are not adequately paid. What is the problem? We need to do the economic reforms. We need to deal, with the social contract. We need to deal with the issues of social protection, so that we are able to, to take care of the poor people. We are also able to have policies that are pro-poor, that are inclusive. And that should not just be relegated to the Pollard. The Pollard platform, yes, it was an initiative to start something, but that process, it needs to be broadened so that it brings everyone on board, but without the conditions that were set to say, you have to admit that I'm the legitimate leader. Yes, there are issues. As we are not politicians should have to solve their issues. But what we are for is for a Zimbabwe that return to full norm compliance, a Zimbabwe that is governed properly, a Zimbabwe that respects the rule of law, a Zimbabwe that takes care of its citizens, a Zimbabwe that also competes economically on the regional front and on the international economic front.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vava, for gracing the conversation today. And also, I'd like to ask if you have a few words to leave to the viewers before we end the show.
Okay, what I can say on behalf of the Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition is that we are in that process of engaging the citizens, of consulting the citizens, and that process is leading to a broader coalition. It's leading to a broader alliance, and that broader alliance, it will set out the Zimbabwe that we want. We already know there have been documents that came out previously, the National People's Convention being one of it, the yellow paper by the Crisis Zimbabwe Coalition, the Save Zimbabwe, campaign that also produced, and the documents like the Zimbabwe, they clearly spell out the Zimbabwe that we want. But what we should do now is for Zimbabweans to be able to reclaim their space, Zimbabweans to be able to reclaim, their space as citizens, and call, for the respect of human rights, call for democratic governance, call for good governance. This is not an MDC struggle. This is not a Crisis Zimbabwe Coalition struggle. This is not a ZANU-PF struggle. It is a struggle for Zimbabwe. It is a struggle for our country to be governed properly. The cries, the blood that was shed during the liberation struggle, that blood, it should not go in vain. Those people that sacrificed their lives, they sacrificed their lives to make sure that we've reclaimed our country from the colonialists. We make sure that Zimbabwe is for everyone. And everyone who is a Zimbabwean should be able to enjoy peace, should be able to love one another as a country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Mr. Blessing Vava from Zimbabwe Crisis Coalition. And he has also agreed that Zimbabwe needs a dialogue, but not only a dialogue, an inclusive dialogue with all parties, all members of states being involved in the dialogue. Thank you very much, viewers, for joining us today in the conversation. And please don't forget to like our Facebook and Instagram and Twitter page, 263 Chat. Don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube page, 263 Chat. And don't forget also to visit our website, www.263chat.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.